folks, I'm still sitting here in the parking lot. I thought I would take a minute, share a little railroad story with you. Nothing better to do than sit here and talk and carry on. She'll probably come right when I get in the middle of it, or this video might get a little drawn out. But I was mentioning earlier about the rock quarry being right down the road here. I guess over the years at that rock quarry, I've changed probably 10 or 15 pairs of wheels. Sometimes when a car gets set out for a hot box or other various defects, we had to come out and fix them on the road. And when you had to change swap out a wheel on a, say, a box car or a covered hopper or usually it was rock hoppers when we were down here at the rock quarry. But you had to come out in a big truck. We called it the road trip truck, the wheel truck. It had various names, but it was a good sized truck. We'd pile 2 or 3 men in that truck and off we'd go. Sometimes I'd be driving, sometimes somebody else would be. But I thought I'd discuss what you do when you're changing a pair of wheels on a rail car. And this could be a little bit boring, but if you think about it, I do know a little bit how to do it. First thing you do, you got to go find the car. There's no telling where it's parked. You find it in a little siding somewhere. If you're lucky enough, you can get your truck close enough to it. Say it's close to a switch. You lock the switch, put your blue flag up where nobody can come in there, and make sure you got protection where nobody's going to drop a car down the hill on top of you. Well, the truck is carrying blocks, big industrial jacks for jacking up a car. The truck has a big crane on the back of it that'll reach around and pick up your jacks and set them off on the ground. The first thing you do, you go to your car and find the wheel that needs to be replaced. And if it's been a hot box, you can pretty well tell which one needs replaced. I'm not going to get into details on that, but sometimes you have to figure out which wheel it was. Make sure it is defective. Occasionally, it would just be sticking brakes or something instead of a bad wheel. A train crew wouldn't know the difference. But if the wheel needs placed, you got 1 or 2 pair of wheels on the back of the truck. Say it's a 6.5 by 12 roller bearing wheel. That's the most common one on rock quarry rock hoppers. Carry the most weight at 36-inch wheels. But you take the crane, set the 2 jacks off, and set them as close to the end of the car that you're going to jack up as you can get. Well, the rest of the way, 2 men have to pick it up by a handle and muscle it over to the side, each side of the car. There's a place on the side of the car right under the body bolsters where you're supposed to jack the car up. So often you'll see a sign that says, "Jack the car here." Well, you put wooden blocks on the ground, scrape out the rocks and gravel nice and flat with a tater rake. You put these long 2-inch thick oak boards out in a pattern on the ground like a pallet. Stack them up as high as you need to get the jack up close to the car. It depends on the height of the body bolster. Sometimes you might have to stack up blocks 2 feet high to get the jack up to the right height. By the time you got the jacks all set up, ready to jack the car, you're wore out. You done lugged them things around there, toted all them blocks. But it was a job we had to do on a regular basis. And a friction bearing wheel, that's an entirely different story. It'd take you all half a day to do a friction bearing wheel. But once you got it down pat on how to do it, you change out a roller bearing wheel, depending on whether it's an inside or an outside wheel, in anything from an hour to 3 hours. But you get your jacks under there, you jack the jacks up, get the car ready to pick up the weight of the car. Then you stop. You go to the other end of the rail car. Take wooden wedges and blocks and chock all the wheels. Block them where the car can't possibly roll to give it some support. You wouldn't want to get the car jacked up in the air and have the car try to roll. Your jacks would turn over. So you got to block them wheels nice and tight to hold it from rolling. If you're lucky enough that the handbrake is just on one end, you can wind up a handbrake down there. But usually you have to let the handbrake off because the handbrake works all 4 pair of wheels unless you're on a caboose. A caboose has a handbrake on both ends. But anyway, you go back to the end where you're going to jack the car up, and you jack the car up just a couple inches. Get under there with a punch and a ball peen hammer and sometimes a bar. You knock the key bolts out of the top rod that's holding the brake levers. Knock that key bolt out. Take the cotter pins out. Disconnect the brake lever, the top rod from the brake lever, and then you're ready to jack the car. When you jack the car up, say 6, 8, 10 inches, and stop and wait. Look at it and make sure the car is level and that you're jacking level. You make sure that it's nice and straight. You don't want to get a car. I've done it. You jack a car up, and if it ain't level, it can fall over. I've seen that happen too. Then you got a big mess on your hands. You go ahead and jack the car up as high as you can get it until it lifts off the center pin that sticks out the truck bolster. You roll the trucks out from under the car. Back your truck around there with your crane that you got on the back of your truck. You lift the truck sides and body bolster up off the 1 pair of wheels. That's a job in itself explaining that. I'm not explaining all. I'm leaving out a half a dozen steps. But you jack up the truck sides and body bolster to disconnect the wheel that you want to replace. Then you can roll the wheel aside. Drop your body bolster and truck sides down on the ground. Reach around with your crane, pick up the new pair of wheels and set them on the track. Reach back and pick up your truck bolster and truck sides, raise it up, and manually roll your new wheel up under there and let it down. Get it all let down, everything put back together straight. You roll that thing back up under the car. Get your center pin lined up on the center plate under the car. Let the car back down onto the truck bolster. Hook your brake levers back up. Wind your handbrakes back up. And you got the wheel replaced. Then you got to go back to the truck. Pick up the old pair of wheels that you've left laying out there on the ground. Load them on the truck. You got to manually tote the jacks back around there where you can reach it with your little crane. Lift them back onto the truck. Pick up all your blocks and wedges. Load them back onto the truck. By then you done spent a half a day and you're wore slap out. But we've done that many a time, change a pair of wheels out on the road. And I'm left out a whole lot of steps, but this video is getting rather lengthy and I didn't want to stretch it out too long. But basically, I just described to you how to change a pair of wheels on a rail car. I mentioned earlier about seeing one turn over. I had a pulpwood car jacked up on a Jackson out on the rip track in Atlanta. I thought I'd share this little story with you. And that fellow's name was Johnson. What was Johnson's first name? I can't remember. Anyway, we were out there working on that pulpwood car. It had been wrecked. And I was trying to straighten a ladder, but what I was going to pull on it was a crane car. I'm in a mobile crane. Not a big mobile crane, but it's got a pretty good sized boom on it. And I'm working the levers on this mobile crane. And Johnson said, pull on it just a little bit. I'm pulling on this ladder. We've heated it and we're trying to straighten it a little bit. I got carried away and pulled it too hard. And when I did, the car got off balance, flipped over and fell on the ground. We looked around to make sure nobody saw me do it. I reached around there with that mobile crane, picked that pulpwood car back up, set it back up on the wheels. Didn't get in trouble, but I could have. You have to be careful. Some of the things we did was rather dangerous, especially getting up under them cars when you're re-railing them, jacking them up. I've seen people lose their fingers, break their fingers. It's been that case where people were killed. I wasn't one of them. I was under a car one time that train started moving. It was a rabbit puller that pulls the cars through the rip track. I think it was me and Greg Reed. And it was a low side car where you couldn't get back out. I was hanging on to every brake lever I could find under there until they got the thing stopped. But anyway, I just thought I'd share a little bit of my Carman experiences about changing a pair of wheels. I've made video before describing what you do at a derailment. It's one of my stories. I re-rail locomotives. Maybe if I think about it, I'll put a link to that story in the video description. Thanks for listening to me rant and carry on. I hope some of you have got a little bit of benefit by listening to me. This is Pwalpar. I'm going to sign off. Y'all take care.